Hello and welcome to today's video. So this time we've got something a bit special. I'm going to be taking a look at Colditz Castle books and collectibles from 1945, the end of the Second World War, right up through till today. There's some fascinating things that have happened related to Colditz over the years, particularly the publication of the books by Pat Reid, the TV show and the spin-offs that came from that, the Action Man sets, as well as right up till recently there was the Damien Lewis TV drama that was also set in Colditz. Now, as well as that, we've got a special segment from Tony from Analog Toys, a fantastic retro toy channel, and Tony has filmed a special bit on the Colditz Action Man sets, so that'll be in here as well. So really a fantastic video, and I do hope you enjoy it. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Colditz Castle is located in Germany, which is near Dresden. Building started in 1033 and progressed in stages with frequent rebuilds and various changes of use, including at one time it was even a zoo. In the 19th century it became a poorhouse and a place to feed the less well-off, and then in turn it became like a mental asylum, which it remained until 1924. When the Nazis came to power during 1933, they converted Colditz into a political prison for communists, homosexuals and Jews and other people that they considered undesirable. The castle gained international fame and notoriety when it became a POW camp, and that was OFAG 4C. And this was designed for escaped Allied officers during the Second World War. So the key mistake the Nazis made was to put all the Allied prisoners who had already escaped from other camps into Colditz, which they deemed was escape-proof. This simply meant that the castle had the finest escapers in occupied Europe, and it didn't take long to start their escape attempts. One of these escapers and the head of the British Escape Committee was Major Pat Reid. Now, Reid successfully escaped with 3 other British officers in October 1942, and he remained in Switzerland until the end of the war. This soon led to the publication of his first book, which is this one you see here, and this is the Colditz story in 1952, published by Hodder and Stoughton. And this one itself was the basis for the 1955 The Colditz Story movie, which was directed by the later prolific James Bond director Guy Hamilton, and it had John Mills. The actor John Mills was playing Pat Reid. The follow-up, The Latter Days, also by Reid, was published 1 year later in 1953. Various editions have been published of this over the years, and we'll look at a lot of them in this video, including an omnibus edition and the sort of TV tie-in editions. So let's have a look at these early books, I think, first of all. So this was the very first hardback. Sadly, I've not got a copy in its dust wrapper, which is a bit of a shame, but it is, I wouldn't say it's expensive, it's just quite tricky to track a nice copy down. But it's the first edition without the wrapper, and I have to say, if you've never read this book by Pat Reid, it is an absolute classic. The guy had never written anything before, and he's such a natural, and there's a real sense of adventure in this. I mean, just superb. And the events in this sort of first volume lead to his initial escape from another German POW camp, which led to him, and sadly he was captured, but because he wasn't a captured Allied prisoner, that led to him being sent to Colditz. And then this leads, he recounts the first escape by Erin Eve of a British officer, and then this leads up to his own escape with 3 other people as well. 3 other prisoners as well. He then stayed in Switzerland, but this book was such a massive success that a year later Hodder and Stoughton commissioned the second one and said, well, look, do the rest of the war. You know all these escaped prisoners. Pat Reid was like a liaison officer in Switzerland for prisoners who'd escaped from all over Germany. And he would like debrief them. So he had first-hand knowledge of how they got away and how they'd done their escape attempts. So he did the follow-up book, which is this one, which is called The Latter Days. This one is also a first edition, but I've got the wrapper in it. It's got a particularly nice little Colditz wrapper there. and it's got an advert for the Colditz story. They have their exits, which was Airy Knee's recount of his Colditz escape, and also the latter days as well, with a little picture of the castle there. There's a book there by Peter Churchill. Now, he was Churchill's nephew, who was also imprisoned in Colditz, and one was one of the Promenati, I think they were called. We've got a look at those as well. So this is another particularly nice book. It's got a map of the castle in front, which has been done, and this was 15 shillings when it came out. First of all, there's a picture of Reid, and when they did the TV series later on, Reid was paid by the actor Edward Hardwicke, who would go on to be the first Watson in Granada's The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, and he really does look a lot like Reid looked back then. So great stuff. Superb. Once again, it reads like a thriller, and it is just as exciting as the second book, if not a little bit more sad, because really there weren't that many escapes in the last couple of years of the war, because the Germans really cracked down on it. There was a fantastic effort by the French inmates, but they knew what was happening all along, and the Germans basically just let them keep occupied doing that, and when they thought it was time to break it up, they did. And after that, it was the writing was on the wall for the Germans, really. So it was pretty much decided to knock it on the head. So those were the original hardback books, and it wasn't long until paperback publisher Pan Books, another one of my absolute favourites, and I've got lots of Pan book videos on my YouTube channel here. So 1954, so the first two books had come out, and the very next year it became time of to do the very first paperback edition of the Colditz story, and this was a massive bestseller. It wasn't Pan's first million seller, but it sold an awful lot. Now, this particular book is quite difficult to find in nice condition because it's so black. The edges tend to get marked very easily, but I would say this particular one is perhaps the best one I've ever had. Although I do have another copy of the original Pan first edition, not quite in such great condition, but still good all the same. So Pan did that, and then of course they did. This one was reprinted with a slightly different jacket. So you can see this was the later edition that Pan did. So it lists him as Pat Reid, MBE, and MC. He was awarded the Military Cross, and the backs changed. So Escape as a Game. And there we are. Look at the back there. Over 500,000 copies sold just in that Pan. It's 500,000 copies of that one. It's the same book. It's just a later reprint. It's gone up a touch. It's now 2 and 6, and this was the first reset edition, and that was in 1958. All right, up until that point, the book had that original one we've just looked at had gone through 10 printings. So that gives you just an idea of quite how popular it was. Pan also produced just the one cover to this one, but it was The Latter Days at Colditz rather than just The Latter Days. And they just did change the title slightly for the paperback edition to get the word Colditz into the title. Quite a interesting cover there, which was in keeping with the other books at the time. And this was published as a great Pan because it is slightly bigger than the regular novels. It's a few hundred pages, this one, as opposed to the original novel. And this was originally published in 1955, so not long after that first book. There were a couple of other interesting Pan editions, which I think we might as well cover now since we're looking at the Pan books. So the first one was this one, which is Colditz the German Story. So this was by Reinhold Eggers. Now, Reinhold Eggers was the camp commandant at Colditz, and this was his sort of his version of events. Now, he wasn't really much of a tyrant, Reinhold Eggers, and he gave as good as he got. He got the prisoners, if they were caught when they were escaping, to recreate their escapes, and he'd take photos and he'd save all their escape paraphernalia for the Colditz Museum. Absolutely fantastic, really. And this is it. This is some of the stuff that he saved, and this is all down to him saving this evidence for posterity, really. So and this is sort of his version of events, and it's very, very good as well. Then the other one that came out in Pan around this time was this one. So this is The Privileged Nightmare. by Giles Romilly. And this one looks at the story of Churchill's nephew and other prominent prisoners in Colditz Castle. So, as I said, Churchill's nephew did become a resident of Colditz, and he was kept with other important political figures from across Europe, just in case they were needed in exchange tokens towards the end of the war, more than anything, and little bargaining tokens. And this one was also published in 1956 with a cover by Carl Wilton. So that's all the little Pan books that came out, and they're fantastic. So Pan had all those editions throughout the 1950s and into the early 60s. But then for some reason, I don't know what happened, they must have lost the rights, or maybe Pat Reid gave them the rights for the first 10 years or so. But then they transferred to Cornet in the UK. And they did these their own editions of the first two books, the Colditz story, and then Latter Days at Colditz, with new jackets. They're good in their own way. The books are exactly the same, but those two editions are they do match, and they're all right. Obviously, of course, these weren't the only sort of escape books out there. One of the most famous, of course, was the Great Escape story, The Wooden Horse, and this is by Eric Williams. So this is one where this one also had a movie tie-in, and I believe they hide the exit underneath the exercise box there. So that's that particular one. And that was published by Fontana. That one was this published? Just have a look. This is so first issued in 1953. That one, so around the time of the early Colditz books. The Great Escape, that fantastic stellar cast movie, was also in the 1960s. This is Paul Brickell did the original novel, although the screenplay, who wrote the screenplay to The Great Escape? Wasn't it? It was either James Clavell or Roald Dahl. I can't remember. No, it's James Clavell. James Clavell did it, the author of Shogun. So yeah, he wrote the screenplay for The Great Escape. There is a still from the movie. I can recognise Charles Bronson there, and I'm not sure if that's a young Richard Attenborough, who was also in the movie. There's a still on the back there. I couldn't quite make out. No, it's not. I thought for a while that was Steve McQueen, but of course he comes in. He gets his own entrance, doesn't he, in the movie? But this is the original Great Escape film time, which is another fantastic escape story. And I thought, since we're covering Colditz, I might as well put some of the related bits and bobs that are in my collection in it as well. But that's a really nice edition, nice Faber paperback. In fact, once again, let's just have a look when that edition was published. 1963, that one. Yeah, fantastic stuff. This was a much later one. This is 90s, I believe, or even the early 2000s. This is a much more factual look at the Great... 2001. This was a much more factual look with a bit more hindsight at that original Great Escape, with interviews with lots of the escapers' families. This is by Anton Gill. And once again, fantastic book. So I just thought I'd throw those in since we're covering them all. Now, the 60s were done, and then in the very early 70s, probably, I mean, this is 20 odd years after the original books came out, the TV series launched. Now that TV series, it was 1972 in actual fact, and the series was broadcast on the BBC, and I have to say, it is fantastic. If you're into Colditz and general escape stories like I am, it's a series that you won't want to miss. So it starred the cast. It was Jack Hedley, Robert Wagner there, you see Robert Wagner, Edward Hardwick, who we talked about earlier, David McCallum, from Man from U.N.C.L.E. fame, Bernard Hepton and Anthony Valentine. Now, both Hepton and Valentine would go later on to star in the BBC sort of wartime drama that came after Colditz, which was Secret Army, and we do have I've got a few Secret Army bits and bobs to look at in a minute, and that was the series that looked at the Belgian resistance. Now the show adapts both novels, the Colditz and the Latter Days, and is definitely very fondly remembered. Pat Reid worked as an advisor on the show, and the popularity, I would say, certainly spawned a brief period in the UK of what I would call Colditz mania, from say 72 up to about 78, because I can certainly remember it when I was growing up. I mean, it even included a travelling exhibition of artefacts, and the BBC commissioned a Return to Colditz documentary, which also got honoured with its own Radio Times cover. I've not been able to track down, I've never seen that documentary. I would absolutely love to. I'm sure it still exists, but it's one of those ones that's waiting to get another airing. One of the big things that came out on the back of the TV show was the incredibly popular board game, and of course the Action Man sets and outfits. So what I'll do first of all then, I'll just show you, these are some of the books that came out in the early 1970s, around the time of the TV series. So there's the Colditz TV time for latter days. There is another Colditz TV time, but it's a photo of the castle in red on the front, which sadly I've not got that one. There's a copy of Airy Neves. They have their exits. This is a fantastic book. It's not as well written as Neves. It's not as exciting, shall we say. However, it is a very good book in its own right. Airy Neave, incidentally, went on to become a Conservative Member of Parliament in the UK. I think he became an MP under Margaret Thatcher's government, and he was victim to an IRA car bomb in 1980. He was driving out of the car park underneath the Houses of Parliament, and as he was going up the ramp, it set off a tilt bomb, and Airy Neave was killed in his car. He's blown up. So he just managed to escape from somewhere like Colditz, and he'd lived his life. He became an MP, and just because of his job, he was killed by the IRA. An absolutely tragic shame, and end into one of the original Colditz escape people. Here's another one, but another different edition of The Privileged Nightmare, the Giles Romilly and Alexander book, and it's been retitled, but it's called Hostages at Colditz. But once again, this is a look at the Promenade. This is another interesting one. So you could say they were grasping at straws a little bit with having something on Colgate, but this is a Padre in Colditz. So this was the Padre, the diary of Alison Platt. Ellison kept a diary throughout the war and was there the whole time. He didn't contribute to any of the escapes, but he was, of course, quite an observer to them all. So that's his sort of story. Eric Williams, we saw him earlier. He was the author of The Wooden Horse. He puts this little compilation together of his favourite sort of escape stories. There's 18 more escape stories. Not just Second World War, but also First World War ones as well. This is quite interesting. I do have First World War escape stories. A few were published by Penguin, but that's for another video maybe. This is another later edition. This is the 70s edition of Colditz, The German Viewpoint by Reinhold Eggers that we saw earlier. And it says, as featured in the television series. So some of what Eggers relates in his story created the overall basis for episodes of the TV series, as well as Pat Reid's books. And finally, we've got this one, which was sort of designed for younger children. And this is my favourite escape stories. And these were selected by Pat Reid, and author of The Colditz Story. So this is some of his favourite escape stories. One other interesting thing before we have a look at some of the memorabilia was this one. So this is the audio adaptation of The Colditz Story. This is read by, the narrator is Patrick Allen. And I'm not sure how old this one is. It's probably dated, but here it is on an old cassette, which I'm sure the youngsters won't recognise these. And this one is, when did this little fella get published? Well, there's no, from what I can see, there's no actual date on it. It's mono. I would have to hazard a guess and say it's probably mid to late 70s, sort of 76, 77, looking at the sort of the style of the packaging and the actual cassette there. Anyway, I think that's a really good point for us to take a pause there. I'll hand over to Tony from Analog Toys, who I'm delighted is here to show us the Colditz Action Man sets that were released basically on the back of the TV show during what I call Colditz Mania. And once we've had a look at those, I'll have a look at the board games. So over to you, Tony.
The Action Man Escape from Colditz set is one of the most iconic Action Man sets of all time, really, right up till that point and pretty much beyond. All the products released for the Action Man range were various different uniforms and accessory sets, but they were never kind of sold with a pre-existing adventure built into it, and that's what really made this set differentiate itself from the rest of the line. Not only that, but it's just cool as hell with some of the best packaging that they ever produced for the Palitoy Action Man line. Now, I know people have said that, you know, you would never see a toy today released with such an offensive symbol on it, like the Nazi swastika. But, you know, you also need to remember that back in the 70s, it was a slightly different time. But even though it was a different time, it was still quite controversial for its day to include an Action Man set that featured such an offensive symbol such as this. But this is a piece of history, and it is really worth discussing in some detail. So the basic boxed Escape from Colditz set consisted of the German sentry box, a German sentry uniform, and a uniform for the escape officer. Also included in the set was a child-sized cardboard parcel, which is really, really interesting. I love the design of this thing. It's a very unique accessory to be included in the Action Man range. And among the other cardboard accessories here, obviously the sentry box is made of cardboard, but there's also a suitcase for the escape officer made from cardboard, which I don't tend to display with mine. I actually prefer the fold-out briefcase that he has that stores the Luger pistol with silencer, the small transmitter, and the stock for the pistol. I think that's a much better accessory to display this particular figure with. There was also another uniform available in the line, which is that of the Colditz Camp Commandant. Now, this was available on a separate card, which is very, very difficult to find today. As a matter of fact, although the German sentry and the escape officer were available in the set, you could also get the British escape officer on his separate card back as well. Now, both this and the Camp Commandant are very, very difficult to find today. I was very, very lucky to acquire this piece. This is actually a recarded set that I've basically reset the accessories onto the, it's an original box, original card, but I have actually reset the accessories to a custom card back. Very, very difficult to find today. These sets are highly, highly collectible just because the packaging is so incredibly striking. The set also comes with a number of cardboard signs. This one here, Achtung Meinen, I believe is German for like caution, mines, minefield ahead. And I also really like to display this set with Brutus the guard dog, which was available through the Action Man Mail Away Collector's Star Scheme. This was never intended to be a part of this set, but I just think it really suits the set. Having a German sentry manning the sentry box with a bull mastiff guard dog, I think it just sort of makes the set really pop, and it just looks as though it belongs there. So overall, the complete set of the Action Man Escape from Colditz series with the 3 different uniforms and the sentry box is a really desirable set of Action Man pieces to collect. A lot of collectors want these simply because they were sort of so unique but extremely iconic as well. I love the color scheme on the sentry box. It really evokes those classic World War II movies like The Great Escape and things like that with that incredible color scheme. The escape officer, I think, is actually a bit of a almost lackluster outfit. He's got some pretty cool accessories. The compass is very, very nice. But altogether, I think the escape officer is relatively boring. However, the German sentry, now this isn't the sentry uniform that actually came with the set. This is just your standard German stormtrooper uniform that was available for Action Man, but that's what I display here. I'm actually missing a few pieces from this set. I don't have the original sentry set. But the Colditz Camp Commandant was the only set available where you could actually get a greatcoat for your German officer, which is just a beautiful accessory, really, really well tailored. It comes in a lovely soft fabric, and this particular uniform is a personal favorite of mine from that period of the Action Man line. If you're looking to acquire one of these sets for your collection, you should be able, they're not going to go cheaply because they're so popular, but they aren't extremely difficult to, they're not easy to find, but they're not extremely difficult to find either. But you will pay a premium price for the fact that they are so collectible. What you will have difficulty getting is the Camp Commandant outfit complete, particularly with the very, very rare baton. And trying to get him carded like the British escape officer is going to be extremely difficult, and it's going to cost you a pretty penny. But overall, this is a tremendous set. It's one of my personal favourites from the golden era of Action Man. And the golden era to me is kind of 1971 till about 1976. That was the golden era for Action Man. And this came out right at the peak of his popularity. It was an extremely popular set back then. It's extremely popular today. And it looks fantastic in your Action Man collection. It makes it for a real great centerpiece. So, all right, thank you very much for watching, and thank you to Jules Burt for inviting me to contribute to this video. Cheers.
So here we have something quite unusual, and that's the Colditz Escape Kit. Now, once again, this was on the back of the TV series, and as you can see, it was released by Parker. Now, it says here that you make and use the following escape aids as the POWs did in Colditz camp. So you got your map there. You've got a like a hand typewriter, a pantograph, I think they call it, so you can sort of copy stuff exactly. A duplicator, so you can make duplicate maps, like I think they did jelly maps in Colditz. You've got a little compass down there as well, and you've got a Colditz cap, so it's everything you would need to escape from Colditz. Now, as much as I'd like to open this one, as you can see, this set is sealed. And I cannot for the life of me think that there's many sealed sets of these in existence. So this was made by Parker, which was a division of Palitoy Toys in Colville in Leicester. And although it's not dated, I imagine this is, once again, from about 73 to 74 possibly. On the back here it says, your task is virtually impossible. Escape from Colditz. Escape from that impenetrable fortress which may otherwise be your prison for months, perhaps years. Remember one thing you must never, repeat never, give up on trying to escape. It is your duty. In this box, secrets of Colditz are revealed. Throw nothing away. With the help of Major Reid's own instructions and your ingenuity, you will piece together map, compass, typewriter. Keep your eyes open, trust no one, and good luck. Devised by Major Pat Reid, author of the Colditz story, technical advisor of the BBTV series. So once again, absolutely fantastic bit of memorabilia this. Certainly there can't be many of these around in any form, particularly unused and sealed like this. I reckon this is quite the rarity, that one. So let's have a look at the first board game. So this is the first board game that came out for Escape from Colditz Castle, but it's perhaps not the one that you'll recognize because that came a year later, based a bit more on the back of the TV show. But this one by Invicta was the first one to actually hit the market. It's got fantastic artwork on the box. I mean, it really is, that's great, isn't it? Man, really sort of captures the spirit of the escapers. It was 1972 this particular one came out, and my version is not mint by any means, but it's certainly not too bad. I think this one is actually quite scarce, you know. It's quite scarce, this. But we'll have a look inside. As I said, my version sadly isn't as mint as I would like, but beggars can't be choosers. So the instructions are under the lid there. All right, so you get to see the instructions. And the way this one works, you've got your cards here like this, and you have to pick up, each player would be given one of these cards, and then you have to pick up all these different bits before you can then start your escape. So you've got your identity card, you need your passport, food, rope or towing equipment, and other things. And then there'll be other things to hinder you as well, like checkpoints and things like that. So you do that, you work your way around. There's the castle there, so I guess it will go around sort of that way with the castle looking at you, and you sort of spin that in the middle there, and then you then follow the instructions. One of the most interesting things is the actual characters. So let's take a few of these out. So they're like little drop on there. They're like little men. You see, they that would go on the board like that, and that's your little escape tokens. So absolutely brilliant. It's an inventive game, but alas, this is not the classic Escape from Colditz game that everyone remembers. It's a version of it. It is Colditz, but it just doesn't have the same finesse as the official game to tie in sort of with the TV show devised by Pat Reid. So I think let's have a look at that one now. So here is the Parker Escape from Colditz game, and this is the first edition of it from 1973. So initially, as you can see, the artwork I think is just superb. It really relays the sort of the excitement of escaping from Colditz. Devised by Major Pat Reid again. You've heard his name many times already. Author of the Colditz story and the latter days of Colditz, technical advisor to the BBC TV series, with his signature along there. Now, the way this game works, you can be a prisoner or you can be one of the German guards. The actual board itself is just, as I said, this was the first release. Just look, I mean, it's a massive game, but just look at that. It's awesome, isn't it? And while we're here, we might as well have a look at the actual board. As I said, this is a really nice example of this one. It's still got the paper between there. And just look how big it is. It's enormous. This is almost the width of my table. And this has got your map of Colditz Castle. The Commandante there, all the different places, and this is all accurate to how Colditz actually was, which is really, really clever, including all the outskirts as well. So absolutely fantastic. So that's just the board. And really nice with the sticker on the front there. And then when we get into the actual game itself, you've got these appel sheets. So this is for when you're when you get called to appel, you have to go on duty. This was the notice that was set up for escaped prisoners, and basically the Germans saying escaping from prison camps is no longer a sport, and it gives you a copy of the rules there. This is the rule book. Once again, you get a little potted history of Colditz, which was only in the first editions of the game. The one by Pat Reid again, which is really, really good. And then this is how the actual pieces were laid out. So, absolutely incredible. They've got a St. John's ambulance aid parcel, which has got your pieces in. So this was been prisoners' parcels, and it was designed to look like, this is what they would have looked like. It came in through Switzerland. A little addendum to the rules there, but as I said, this was the first edition of this one. And then you've got your various pieces there as well. All the actual prisoners are these little characters here, and yeah, one person would play as a German, and up to 4 people could play as escaping British or escaping Allied soldiers. And the aim was, you set the amount of time that you would like to play. So say I'm going to play for 2 hours, or until someone has managed to get 2 people away. And much the same as the previous game, you have to sort of pick up all the different parts of your escape kit and then make your escape away. But there is also an element of luck involved, which is perhaps how it actually was during the war. They needed that element of luck on their side to actually get away from the castle. But certainly an iconic game, and it was around for a long time. It disappeared probably in the early 90s, but it came back again. Just recently, about 6 or 7 years ago. There was, what were they called again? I don't believe it's Osprey Publishing, but it might be the same people who did the book, else it's Pen and Sword, and they publish military titles. They re-released the Escape from Colditz game, so you can actually still buy it today. And it certainly is a fantastic game. There were a couple of other things. There's been various computer games over the years, right back to the days of the Spectrum, up until the Xbox. But that, once again, they're so vast and there's so many of them, and there's so many different little spin-offs, that'll probably justify its own video, to be honest. So here we have a couple more bits. So this was included in the travelling exhibition. You got one of these when you actually went into the exhibition, but you also got a copy in early editions of the board game. And this is just like a very short potted history of Colditz Castle. It's just, it's a bit of fun and worth sort of having in your collection. This one's much scarcer in actual fact. Now this was what they call the Colditz escape map, and it was used as a promotion by Galaxy and Ripple, which are chocolate brands in the UK. And this was a map of Colditz, so the Colditz escape map showing escape routes from Colditz. And it shows various escapes and how they got out. So you've got escapes by Captain Lebrun, who was on the French cavalry. Fowler there, Airy Neve was the first British guy out. Pat Reid, of course, Major Littledale, Will Hammond, and one of the Dutch contingent there, Captain Elliot, Major Elliot of the Irish Guards. Once again, a tiny little potted history of Colditz, and then the sort of fold-out map. Absolutely fantastic. So it's just basically Bartholomew's map of Europe, and it's got, you can see there's some of the sort of escape routes on it. Nice little like promotional item. I'm not sure exactly what you had to do. Chances are you had to save up Galaxy and Ripple wrappers, send them in with like 20p or something like that, and you get your original Colditz escape map. But it's a bit of fun. I think, I have a funny feeling that that's probably quite scarce, that. So if you do come across, I mean, I've had it literally for years, 20, 30 years. So, but if you do come across one of those, probably worth grabbing. Now, I mentioned earlier, after the Colditz TV show, which was incredibly popular, it did, and Pat Reid, working as an advisor on it, that led to the board game, and it led to the Action Man craze. It was also repeated quite regularly on the BBC. It was repeated in its entirety in 1975-76, I think, bar 2 episodes where there was one of the writers actually objected to his episodes being repeated, but the rest of it was reshown. But once Colditz had wrapped filming, and they did it over 2 seasons, they'd done the story, and the castle was liberated. The next series that a lot of those original Colditz creators from the BBC show worked on was Secret Army. Now, this was the one, as I said, it had some of the same cast from Colditz. Bernard Hepton, who played the commandant in Colditz, he played the cafe owner in Secret Army, and also Anthony Valentine, who was an inmate in Colditz, but he played the doctor in Secret Army. And this itself spawned 3 books. There was 3 seasons of the show, and there was also a spin-off called Kessler, which follows the evil German officer after the end of the Second World War and his escape with his mistress. Absolutely fantastic show. If anything, I enjoy Secret Army even more than Colditz because it's that well made. It really is. And I believe that's all the books that came out. So you had End of the Line, which is quite a thin little book, but I believe that adapts the Kessler six-part mini-series. And then these 2 books here, that's Jan Francis. This adapts season 1, and this is pretty much seasons 2 and 3 up to the end of the war there. Worth tracking down those because Secret Army is great. And after that, the BBC did one more thing with regards not escaped prisoners, but POWs, and that was Tenko, which was another series that was incredibly popular back in the day. So it started about 1980, 81. There was, I believe, 3 seasons of the show. Then there was a couple of specials. There was Last Tenko and Tenko Reunion. This is the original sort of story for Tenko. Then you had Last Tenko, which wraps it up until they get liberated and they join up with the British, the men's camp rather, and then they spend a year or so in Singapore till they go back to the UK. And then you've got Tenko Reunion, which was the reunion about a year or so after the Second World War had finished, and they all meet up and sort of reminisce. So really good stuff. There was another one. This was an American edition, or an American copy of a British book called The Other Side of Tenko, and this was the men, life in one of the men's camps around that time, which is quite interesting. And of course, the subject was revisited a little bit much more recently in the movie Paradise Road, and this is called Women Beyond the Wire, and this was by Lavina Warner, and it was her original story that Tenko was based on, in actual fact. So once again, quite interesting. So these are a few other books that I've got that are sort of later Colditz books in my collection. So this one is Colditz the Full Story, and they class it the final classic of the Colditz trilogy. Well, as you know, it was never a trilogy, but in hindsight, Pat Reid goes back for the final time, and he adds his own opinions and a little bit more information that's come to light since the end of the war. Certain people had died, and they'd left records and diaries and things like that for a long time. Even the Colditz glider was, there was no real proof of it until a photo surfaced, and it showed that it was actually in existence. So that's worth tracking down. That's the first time. That, I guess, is the definitive way to read the books nowadays. This is an interesting one. This is another one by Reinhold Eggers, and this is Colditz Recaptured. Now, this is another copy. This was his follow-up to the German story. So this is the events leading up to Colditz getting liberated by the original camp commandant. This is quite a nice hardback by Robert Hale. This one here is The Diggers of Colditz, Jack Champ and Colin Burgess, with a foreword by Pat Reid again. Anything to get Pat Reid's name in on the action. This is some of the Diggers, and this was £10. This edition here, published 1985. Quite nicely illustrated, that one. This was a book that came out fairly recently. This next one. This was a look at Big X. Now that was Richard Attenborough in the Great Escape movie, and this was his sort of biography by Simon Pearson. Yeah, nice book, this one. Illustrated, published in conjunction with the Imperial War Museum, and fascinating character for sure. This one's interesting. This is a work of fiction. Now, this one came out in the early 2000s, I believe. This one by Guy Walters, and basically the premise is, so this isn't based on fact, this is fiction, all right, this is fiction, but it was two guys who escaped from Colditz during the war. One of them was shot, and he urges his mate to go on to safety, and he escapes. And he just assumes his friend was captured and killed. Years later, well, I say years later, back then in the 1970s, early 70s, around the time, in fact, of the TV show, someone says to him that in actual fact his friend wasn't killed, and he was on a far more sinister and clandestine mission. The guy who did escape is working for MI6, so he takes it upon himself to investigate it, and that is sort of the basis of the thriller. The only other thing I could think of recently that came out, sort of, well, post-2000, was a Doctor Who CD which was set in Colditz. So I'll pop a picture of that one up at the moment in the video, but that was with Sylvester McCoy and Sophie Aldred. What have we got now? So this is a slightly larger format book, but one I absolutely love to death. This is called Camera in Colditz. Now, Colditz was, as you know, there wasn't a lot of photos in Colditz, but what exists pretty much in its entirety was compiled and put together by this guy, Ron Baybutt, and I gotta say, it's really, really good. I remember borrowing this one as a kid from the local library and being absolutely fascinated by it. And having read the Pat Reid books, it's really good to be able to put sort of faces to the names that you've heard. So there's some really, really good stuff here, isn't there? It's the best sort of illustrated book on Colditz that I think ever got published, in my opinion. I think it's great. So yeah, Camera and Colditz, definitely one to get your hands on if you can, that one. But there are a couple of other quite nice books. So this one's sort of a bit of a potted history of Colditz. It's a big sort of, let's try and get it in the light so it doesn't reflect too much. Sort of a big potted history of Colditz. It's a sort of a coffee table book. There's nothing really in this one that you've not seen before in any other editions. But if you wanted something a bit more glossy, then perhaps this is one for you. Let's give it a bit more room. Some of those great photos that the Germans took of recreating some of the escapes. Good stuff, isn't it? But as I said, there's probably nothing in here that you've never seen before. But interesting all the same. Copies of this are dirt cheap, you know, just a couple of quid online. This one's quite nice as well. Now it says Collecting Colditz and Its Secrets. So this isn't what you might think. It's not about Colditz collectibles, alas. It's just a pictorial record of life behind the walls. And there wasn't a lot TV-wise for Colditz, really, until about 1999 when Channel 4 commissioned a new documentary on Colditz, and they got all the surviving Colditz inmates that they could get their hands on that were still living, to go back to Colditz and come up with some of their memories. They even found a couple of little hides where the prisoners had saved stuff and they were still there. And they recreated the Colditz glider and took that for a spin at the very end as well. It's a 3-part documentary. It's available to view on YouTube, so you can watch it on there, and it comes highly recommended. It's a great little look at Colditz, and if you're interested in the history of the castle and the escapes, it's well worth you tracking down. There was, of course, one other drama that came out in 2005, and that had Damian Lewis and Sophia Miles. So Damian Lewis, of course, was the star of Band of Brothers, one of them, and it stars him in like a 2-part TV drama set within the confines of Colditz, but not strictly historically accurate like the Colditz TV series. It's worth a look. It's entertaining. It is what it is, really. It's not definitive by any means. It's just a bit of fun, but it is quite good. It does sort of relay the first sort of big escape attempt by the British officers, and for that alone, and for Damian Lewis being such a superb actor, it does warrant looking at. Then the very last thing we're going to look at today is this one, which this came out by Osprey. Now, Osprey are great military publishers, and this is their Fortress series. It's number Fortress 97, and this itself is a history of Colditz, and it's very good. It doesn't just go through the escapes, although that's the main part of it, but it does also give you a sort of in fact, there is the chronology of the castle for all to see. You can, of course, visit Colditz nowadays. It's a tourist attraction because for many years it was on the eastern side of Germany, which was a bit locked down for us Westerners, but not anymore. And there's a youth hostel there. There is now a museum, a Colditz museum, based on the back of all the great escapes that happened during the Second World War. And it's definitely a place that I think I'm going to make a point of getting to visit whenever I can. So there we are. So I hope you have enjoyed this look through all these Colditz and escape bits and bobs. It's certainly been a lot of fun. This video's taken a long time to put together, but I hope you agree it's been worth it. Thanks once again to Tony at Analog Toys for his sterling work with his Action Man piece. If you've not checked Tony's channel out, there's so much good stuff on it. I mean, you'll be there for days going through all his content. It's fantastic. If you have enjoyed this video, do please give it a thumbs up. Do please consider subscribing for regular content like this. I love old paperbacks, I love old toys, and there's loads of it on the channel, and I've got so much more to come. Thank you very much for watching today, and I shall look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye.